Welcome to a play-by-play review. I'm your host, Henry, and I'm finally getting around to doing that Warship Wednesdays episode that I promised for so long. Episode 2 of this series of one episodes for about a couple months now at this point. I've been racking my brain on what I want to do for a podcast episode. Just something quick here, just to get something out while I edit a bunch of Star Wars stuff for my main YouTube channel. And get ready for the divisional round for the NFL. I was tempted to do one on MLB free agency since there's been a lot of stuff that's gone on, but I'm going to give that a little bit more time because it's, we still have like 2 more months really till, spring training and stuff like that starts up. So I'm going to wait until that's over to do anything like that. It's just there's been a lot, especially recently with, Kyle Tucker and Bo Bichette signings happened, yesterday, as I'm recording this. Recently, essentially, for when I'm recording this. But for now, though, I'm going to pivot back over to my historical side and go with another Warships episode. I don't know why I'm being so quiet, but, I feel like I should give it a little bit more of a low and casual tone, I should say. So this episode is going to be on some particular brand of ships in World War II that are aviation ships in the sense that they can launch planes, but not aircraft carriers. There were attempts largely by the Japanese, though it was not exclusive to them, to mount planes to their ships, and not just reconnaissance planes, but also attack planes on some of them, during the course of World War II and even before that a little bit, as the proliferation of aircraft and the realization that aircraft are extremely useful in combat became more apparent, since the kind of doctrine for naval warfare and really warfare in general, but specifically for naval warfare because that's what I'm talking about in this one, leading up to World War II, the battleship was still the king of the sea, or queen, I guess, because ships are always female, but anyway. World War I was very much aircraft carriers didn't exist really in World War I. I think the first ones may have started to be built around that time, maybe a little bit after, but I don't think there were any aircraft carriers that ever really saw combat in World War I. It was all battleships. It was largely battleships, battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, whatever you want to call them, ships with big guns. Even comparing it to how World War II ships, the composition of fleets, destroyers were there, but you didn't really see as many cruisers or heavy or light cruisers. There's still definitely some here and there, but you think, if you think naval battles in World War I, there aren't honestly too many huge ones, since it was largely concentrated between Germany and England, and most of them fielded large fleets of battleships and battlecruisers. The British especially were in love with their battlecruisers. They love making battlecruisers. Germany more so their dreadnoughts. And you look at the Battle of Jutland, which is the big World War I naval battle, and that was a big gunnery duel between battleships of both Germany and England. That is the quintessential World War I naval action. As the interwar period grew, and technology obviously evolved, as well as doctrines evolved, the compositions for fleets weren't just, let's build a bunch of battleships, because more so than anything else, speed started to become more of a factor. Everything in World War I, ships were just really slow. And you look at a ship built in the 20s compared to one even built in the 30s, they're completely different. And a lot of this is also kind of a side tangent, but I just felt like I should include this anyway. But for a lot of nations, a lot of major nations that are building up their naval forces in the interwar period, America, Britain, France, Italy, Japan, probably all of the big ones. Germany in secret, but also not really, and then also kind of Russia, but not really. It's really the United States, Britain, Japan are probably the top 3, and then France and Italy kind of right behind them. All of them, for their big ships, their battleships essentially, there was a big push to try and build faster battleships. The literal title of fast battleship became a thing during the interwar period. So think the the Congo class for Japan was, it was basically just like, what if we take a battle cruiser but made it a bit better armored? And I think some people even consider the Congo class a battle cruiser rather than a battleship, since it doesn't have the best armor in the world, but it was definitely designed more as a fast battleship. The U.S. would by the late 30s, when the Washington Naval Treaty and the London Naval Treaty just kind of got thrown out the window, their new battleship designs kind of pivoted more towards the fast battleship design. So like the North Carolina class, the South Dakota class, and especially the Iowa class were fast battleships essentially. And at that point, like, the battle cruiser design was kind of phased out. I don't really know where I'm exactly trying to go for this, but I just like talking about naval history and all this. But I swear I'll get to the actual ships that I want to talk about anyway. But I like providing context for how all this kind of comes to be. And in the interwar period, Japan especially, they seem to be big into battleships, but also started developing a lot of carriers as well. And just the idea of an airplane, as the airplanes especially grew insanely quickly in terms of how, like, the technology level and the modernization level, like even at the start of World War One, or not World War One, like World War Two, like mid-30s, a lot of people were still using biplanes for various things. But you flash forward to 1945, and you barely see any biplanes of any sort. And I mean, even at the end of 1945, you have jet engines at that point. Like the development of airplanes is like a exponential growth essentially in terms of how fast they became. And you see how quickly how quickly all nations start to realize that aircraft are really, really useful in wartime, including in the Navy. And Japan was no exception. They were probably the biggest proponent of using aircraft early on in World War II, I'd say. I mean, I think it's kind of, the obvious thing of Pearl Harbor and all that, but they had a lot of carriers. U.S. had a lot of carriers, well, a decent amount of carriers as well, but it wasn't a ton compared to what they had at the end of the war. Like, in terms of fleet carriers, I think off the top of my head, the U.S. had, I believe, so it was the two Lexington class, Lexington, Saratoga, the Ranger, and then the three Yorktown class. So Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet. So that's 6, I think. I might be forgetting one, but like I might just be forgetting another carrier here and there. But I think that was basically what the U.S. had at the start of World War One. I don't know why I said World War One. It started World War Two, and even by Pearl Harbor, like they only had 6. Japan had, in terms of fleet carriers, not even smaller carriers. They had at least 6 in the Kido Butai, which is the group that attacked Pearl Harbor, along with more that I'm probably blanking on. But like 6 and 8, it's close enough. But Japan definitely seemed more forward thinking in terms of using aircraft in naval combat, more so than I think other nations going into World War II, and even at the start of World War II. Unfortunately for them, well, there's a few things. As the war went on, they did not have a lot of experienced pilots left over after, say, the Battle of Midway. A lot of their experienced pilots perished during the early years of or during the early action against the U.S. in World War II. The U.S. were very good at designing anti-aircraft batteries. The 40 millimeter Bofors. I know the Bofors is not an American gun, but they strap those guns onto everything, on every single ship possible. It feels like the like quad Bofors that they had, which are 40 millimeter guns, are just on every single U.S. warship, and they're really good. And that's not counting like everything else, but you see all the footage, all the war footage, all the grainy attacks from Japanese aircraft, and you just see this hail of bullets going on. And you see why the Americas was like really good at defending against air attacks, is that they had a ton of firepower. And as especially after the Battle of Midway, where Japan loses 4 carriers and all of their air groups a ton of pilots, a ton of planes for a nation that was already kind of starved of resources. It's part of the reason why they invaded China and specifically Manchuria, is because they needed natural resources to build up everything essentially. And Japan, they lose so much of their aircraft capabilities in that one battle. They need to scramble, and part of that is that they, along with losing carriers, along with losing planes, they also lose carriers, and that means they don't have as many. I'm trying to look up something in the meantime. That's why I'm stuttering here. But yeah, they don't have as many physical platforms to be able to launch planes in wartime. Like, just not from a static airbase, from a moving ship. And that's kind of where, after this 10-minute plus preamble, where I'm getting to now. So the first ship that I'm going to be, class of ship actually, that I'm going to be looking at is actually one that was kind of designed before the Battle of Midway, so I'm lying a bit there, but it kind of sets the stage. So the Tone class cruiser is an interesting one, to say the least. So it's a later design of their heavy cruiser, or really just kind of cruiser in general, because they only really had one later on. They only had one line of cruisers. It succeeds the Mogami class, which were, I think, they had light cruiser guns. This is just getting me being very pedantic about things, but they're kind of in the line of heavy cruisers. It's a whole thing, doesn't really matter too much. But anyway, the Tone class has 8 guns in a very odd layout where they are all at the front. There's the front 2 are super firing. So the turret A, it's like A, B, C, D for the turrets. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4 right in a row. Turret A is the one all the way at the front of the bow, essentially. And it's like low level. Turret 2 behind it is super firing, so it's raised up and can fire above it. Turret 3 is directly behind it and cannot face forward. It is on the same level as Turret 1 and cannot face directly forward. It has to swivel around the barbette of Turret 2, and I don't know why the Japanese designers decided to go with this. It's the same on the Takao class, same exact design there. And then the final turret is right behind Turret 3, or Turret C, whatever you want to say, also on the lowest level, and it also cannot fire directly forward. It's a very odd design. The entire rear of the cruiser design is basically a very intricate catapult system that can launch up to 3 to 5 planes, I think, at a time. I think officially it could hold 6 planes for its air group. But it never, the Tone and its sister ship, the Chikuma, could never really fit that many, just in general, because they just, I guess, wasn't enough room or something, or just whatever the reason, they couldn't fit all of them on at one time. But they could still fit, at least 3 or 4. And for these ones, they used, all these ships that I'm going to be talking about are using float planes, since there just isn't enough room to have a regular takeoff and landing like your aircraft carrier does. So then instead they use catapults and then cranes to pull the planes back up out of the water, which it's common. It's not that's actually a very common sight on basically any ship that uses reconnaissance planes. A lot of battleships use cranes and catapults. It's just these have a bit more to them than your typical catapult and crane operation for a float plane. The Tone has it's just the entire backside is reserved for its float planes, and these are reconnaissance planes. They're not attack planes. You could theoretically probably later on in the war refit some attack planes, I think, maybe, but for them compared to the others that I'm going to be talking about, this was entirely for reconnaissance. And it's kind of there. I mean, reconnaissance is always very helpful, and these I think are more geared towards support in their role rather than strictly attack, because you obviously have 8 heavy cruiser guns, along with some secondary armaments, and that's very good. It's a strong armament, but you also have an entire wing essentially of reconnaissance planes, and that can be extremely useful for sailing in a battle group, since obviously reconnaissance is very good, and you don't need to dedicate carrier time to scout planes. Essentially, you have a mobile scouting force on one of your smaller support ships. I mean, it's not that the Tone class is small, but it's smaller than your battleship or your carrier. And, it's actually a pretty neat idea of having, a very heavily dedicated scouting force on a cruiser. So you have a little bit of protection and a lot of range as well, and firepower. So it's like it's not defenseless in the slightest. It's it can certainly punch back when it needs to, and you throw in very useful reconnaissance capabilities, which in wartime is extremely useful. Knowing more than your enemy is basically never a bad thing. I mean, look at the Battle of Midway. The U.S. had better knowledge of what was happening during the battle and like how the battle was shaping up than the Japanese did, and that was one of the big reasons why they were able to pretty handily hand the Japanese their proverbial butts. But as for the fate of these two ships, the Tone and the Chikuma, both of them were sunk during the course of the war. The Tone was sunk pretty late in the war. I think Battle of the Philippine Sea, or Leyte Gulf actually, is what I'm reading at the moment. And the Chikuma was sunk also, I guess, during the must have been Battle of Leyte Gulf, I guess. Hang on. Because Leyte Gulf is 1944, and that includes the Battle off Samar, which is where the Chikuma was sunk. The Tone was Battle of the Philippine Sea, maybe. I think that's what it was, actually. So that was sunk in, sunk in 1945. Actually, no, it sunk near Kure. It sunk near Japan. My apologies. I misread that. So yeah, the Tone was sunk near Japan, probably docked in a harbor at some point, and the Chikuma was sunk during the Battle off Samar, which, side note, that battle is kind of crazy because that's the battle where basically a bunch of destroyers, I think it's The Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors is the book that was written about it. But it was the one where basically a group of destroyers, destroyer escorts, and a couple of escort carriers faced off against an entire fleet of battleships and heavy cruisers, including the Yamato itself, and were able to at least fend off the attack well enough that the Japanese force retreated and actually managed to sink a good one. It's could be an episode for another time because that's a whole like really impressive and really just awesome battle from a historical perspective. Obviously, war and people dying and all that sucks. And like every time I feel like I have to talk about war, it's like, yes, war sucks. It's bad. I don't like people dying. I like studying it from a perspective of someone who is living basically 80 years in the future. So yeah, the Battle of Samar, that could be a whole episode because it's a very interesting, basically the closest we have to a David versus Goliath naval battle where David kind of wins, but not without a black eye. Anyway, the next ship class that I want to go over is a bigger one, the Issei class, which is a battleship class, actually. So these are like, this is the one where when I was coming up with this episode idea, I was like, I really want to talk about these because these are cool. And in the sense of like, just the idea of it. The execution, not so great, but like from a Wacky Warships, as the title suggests, perspective, and like why I always find stuff like this so fascinating is that you're taking, in this case, a pair of battleships, the Issei and the Hyuga, and refitting them to try and be a hybrid battleship aircraft carrier, essentially. It's such an odd thing to do, but like I get the reasoning why, because at that point, these were refit in 1940, I believe. 1940, 1941, 1942, roughly. When exactly? Late 1941, actually. So it was like 1941, 1942, essentially. They were refit around this time. So these were two battleships that were built in like around World War One, essentially. They're dreadnought era battleships. And for the time, I mean, they had 6 turrets, so they had 12 guns with 14 inch guns. Sorry, the 356 millimeter guns. So they're if you know the Fuso class, which is kind of the classic Japanese like World War One era battleship of having the pagoda tower, the massive amount of guns, and a odd-ish kind of layup, like having 2 in the front, 2 in the middle, 2 in the back, essentially like split around by the superstructure. the Issei class is basically just a better version of basically an improved version of the Fuso class, kind of. They're like similar design essentially, but by the time World War II rolls around, they're very outdated because they're slow. Their armor isn't great. It was good for the time, but it was definitely outclassed. Their armament was also, they have a lot of guns, but also kind of outclassed because everyone's kind of moving on to 15 and 16-inch guns, and even the Japanese were moving on to 18-inch guns with the Yamato class. There wasn't a ton of need for older battleships like this when carriers were, and really just planes in general, were becoming more prevalent. And the Japanese, they sink the Repulse and the Prince of Wales British battleships. Well, technically the Repulse is battlecruiser, but anyway, they sink them kind of near India, or at least in the Indian Ocean, and they realized that, oh yeah, battleships kind of obsolete at this point, and we should focus more on carriers. And then they lose Midway, and they lose a bunch of carriers, and like, oh yeah, we really need planes. So they basically take the two Issei ships, the Issei and the Hyuga, and strip off their rear two turrets and convert the entire back third of the ship into a flight deck, essentially. And it could essentially how it was designed and how they planned it was that they could field up to an air group of 11 bombers, essentially, like dive bombers, which is kind of crazy. Like, you can launch a full air group, like not just a couple planes, like a full-on 11-person air wing with bombs and stuff. This isn't just a reconnaissance thing. This is a full-on attack group from the back of a battleship while still, being, say, a flotilla leader or something like that. Like, this isn't a support ship. This is a battleship. Even if it only has 4 guns at this point, it's a battleship with attack planes, essentially. Like, that's the idea. And it's in war, when you're losing at this point, or at least when things aren't going as expected, you kind of have to improvise. And this is an interesting way to try and remedy the issue. Unfortunately for the Japanese, they just couldn't really field these ships all that well. They just didn't have enough planes or enough pilots to fully crew the ships that they wanted. And again, it's a very common theme for Japan in World War II, is that they ran out of pilots, experienced pilots, for their planes very, very quickly. And they also ran out of planes pretty quickly as well. The Shinano, just to jump around a little bit. So the third of the Yamato class battleships, the Shinano, was refitted during its construction into a carrier. Although it was this weird carrier tender, it was this whole mess essentially. And the idea, the ideal goal of it was to be, another state of the art fleet carrier. It just never got to there, and it never even got to field a single plane. They had none, essentially. They had no usable naval attack planes that they could fit onto the Shinano, since by then it was completed in either 1944 or 45. I don't remember exactly, but it was completed late in the war. And even then it was only half finished when they started to tug it out. And then it got sunk by a U.S. submarine. I think the Bluefin. I could be wrong, but I think it's the Bluefin. It's been a minute since I looked up the story of the Shinano, but that's what I remember. But anyway, yeah, story of Japan is that they were a resource-starved nation comparatively to a lot of the other major nations in World War II, since obviously they're not a very large nation comparatively, and with the amount of history they had, they burned through a lot of resources, and they, by the time World War II gets going, they already have a really big standing navy, one of the biggest. So they've already sunk in a ton of their resources, and they're trying to invade they did invade and conquer much of China to pillage as much as they could. One of the big reasons why the U.S. and Japan, why their tensions increased so much, was that the U.S., after Japan's invasion of China in, I believe, 1936, the U.S. imposed an oil embargo, and Japan was not a nation that had a lot of natural oil whatsoever. They heavily relied on United States oil to make their ships go, because Japan was chewed through a lot of fuel for their massive navy, since they were a seafaring nation. And the oil embargo really put a damper in their plans, so they needed to look elsewhere. And it was a whole thing. And It's kind of the story of why one of the reasons why they wanted to expand so much in the eastern seaboard was to just find as much resources and much land as possible that they could use to try and sustain themselves. And when you go into a war against America, which is much, much bigger and has a ton more resources, every loss really hurts because, unlike America, they can't really rebuild. America could rebuild. They rebuilt, well, their war economy, well, I should say our war economy, because I am American. And I guess I should say them because there was different people in the past. But yeah, the American war economy was just absurd. Like, the amount of ships they produced among everything else was ridiculous. I think the Essex class alone, the carriers there, and I get they produced like half of them after the war, but the Essex class alone was 32 carriers that they all built, which is crazy. And they're not even small carriers. Like, some of the biggest carriers, like pre-nuclear age aircraft carriers in existence. The Essex class is just insane. And you look at the Liberty ships, and they built the fastest thing one of those was built in was from literal, like, basically nothing, like laying down the keel of a Liberty ship to launching was 3 days. And that is stupid because it is an entire ship, an entire supply ship, and not a small one either. It is an entire supply ship that was built from the ground up essentially in 3 days. Like, that's how good America was at building stuff in World War II. It was ridiculous. As for to circle finally back to the Isai class, because this is another one where I'm a little tired, it's a little late, and I didn't have too much planned for this, so it was very rambly. But the Isai class is a cool idea in theory, in the sense of, like, yeah, it's unique, and from someone who likes naval history and all that, it's a neat idea. It didn't really work out in reality, which is kind of the theme for a lot of these. It's just, yeah, if you want to build a ship that or have a ship that can deploy attack aircraft, just make an aircraft carrier. I know obviously the Japanese couldn't, but it's like at the point when these ships were starting to get refitted. But it's the lesson you should learn from this is that if you're gonna build a ship that can deploy aircraft, just build an aircraft carrier. This is not going to be like Ace Combat 7's DLC where you have the Alicorn, the like super powered nuclear submarine with an entire hangar. Like an entire hangar filled with like F-18s inside of it with nukes on them. I love Ace Combat. It's so over the top. I'm so excited for Ace Combat 8. It's gonna be very fun. But yeah, the Issei and the Hyuga, I believe were both sunk. I forget exactly when. Can it tell me when? Oh no, they're actually both scrapped. Never mind. I thought at least one of them was destroyed in like one of the later battles of the war, but I guess not. Yeah, they weren't able to do much, but it's still an interesting idea in the first place. But also, speaking of submarines that can launch planes, and the Alicorn and all that, but also not really the Alicorn. The last sort of various types of ships that I want to talk about are ships or submarines that launch planes are a thing that exists in real life. It is not just reserved for Ace Combat. None of them were ever nearly as big as the Alicorn. They didn't have any like railguns or anything like that. Don't worry about that. But yes, submarine aircraft carriers, I guess is what you would call them, did exist. There are actually a lot of them of varying nations. Like I'll get to the Surcouf in a little bit because that's the one non-Japanese ship that I want to talk about because that ship is really weird and also coming to Wacky Warships soon for like 1.4 million coal because it's a salvage for victory event. But anyway, the Japanese ships that I want to talk about though, these submarine aircraft carriers, are the I-400 class. They're not the only submarine aircraft carriers that were built, but these I think are the biggest and like most important. I think most notable, I should say. So they're actually some of the biggest submarines built, just period. Before like the nuclear submarines, ballistic missile submarines, the Cold War era, essentially. Like these were the biggest World War II era submarines ever built, and three of them were actually built: the I-400, I-401, and I-402. I think all of them were sunk, or the first one, the I-400, was sunk. And actually, no, all of them were actually. They're all captured at various points or like won over. Basically, none of them were sunk during the war. They were all sunk during gunnery trials and stuff near Hawaii after the war. Basically, used as target ships, like many warships from World War II that were obsolete at that point. So they all survived the war, but didn't end up like in museums or anything like that. They were all, or even scrapped at that point. They were all used as target ships. But the I-400s, the Sentoku, that's what they are. The Sentoku class were interesting because they could. A lot of submarine carriers usually only have like one plane, maybe, and it was like even a tight squeeze. This one could actually fit 3 float planes in it. Like these were reconnaissance float planes, not quite attack float planes, but it's still interesting. Or actually, no, never mind. I am completely wrong. They are attack float planes. Never mind. I thought that I was reading. I saw the name and I was like, that reminds me of the reconnaissance plane. But no, it is the M6A1, the M6A Seiran. Those are the attack planes. So I think, if I'm actually remembering correctly, now that I'm thinking about it again and rereading it, I think a part of the plan was to like send them over to like Alaska or something and load them up, like load the planes up with bombs, and they could float like, not sail. I don't know what would the term be for like submarine sailing underwater, but like they would go underwater into like American ports and launch their attack planes, and then they would like drop stuff onto cities or something. I feel like I remember hearing about that on something, and I'm pretty sure these were the ships that were designed to do that. Like they could sneak in with planes that actually had some good range and armaments, and attack essentially. Obviously, these subs also have torpedoes, and these specifically had a 140 millimeter deck gun, which is pretty common, like a fairly big deck gun for ships, especially of this size. But yeah, it's interesting to see like how the idea of like trying to get planes, attack planes essentially, in different types of ships, and just the fact that you're a submarine, it's designed to go underwater, but it can also surface and launch planes from it. Like it's still crazy to me. Like it has a catapult, it has a crane on it, so it's got the whole operation, and it still is pretty cool. The idea is pretty cool. I don't think these ships were super successful in that sort of role, but it's still something, and they did last all through the war. But I don't think other than that they were too noticeable. Oh yeah, here it is. Yeah, Operation Cherry Blossoms and Night. That's what it is. That was the thing I was thinking of, and it was that they would drop. Actually, it was biological, like chemical weapons, essentially. It was, what was it? Is it the the weaponized bubonic plague? That's what it was. To like on like American cities, which is kind of crazy. I knew I was remembering it, but yeah, there's like if you ever hear about that crazy thing, they would these were the ships that wound up that were selected for it. But I don't think it definitely didn't end up happening, because I think we would have heard about it, but I don't think the operation ever actually saw fruition. Like there wasn't like the Americans stopped them. They just, for whatever reason, they oh yeah, that's what it was. The plan was scheduled for September 22nd, 1945, but obviously Japan surrendered before then. That's what it was. Yeah, my knowledge of this is limited, but I luckily have the internet to help me out. Anyway, so final ship for this short episode, just to get something out for fun, is the Surcouf, because the ship is just ridiculous. I talked a little bit about it in my last episode, like months ago at this point. But the Surcouf is like the Sentoku class, very large submarine that can also launch planes. However, the Surcouf was less about launching planes. It could, I believe, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it had a hangar. It could launch one float plane, but this was not a submarine that was, an aviation submarine, a submarine aircraft carrier. This was a cruiser submarine. Very specific subclass of submarines that were few and far between. Like you could throw in some ships from like other nations, but the Surcouf is really the only one that like you could really say it like was a cruiser submarine, because this is a large ship. And not only that, what it also has is two 8-inch guns, two heavy cruiser guns, 203 millimeter guns that are mounted on a submarine. It's still crazy to me. Like, it surfaces up with guns like half the size of the ship, and not actually, but like half the size of its bridge essentially. And it could it could surface up right next to a tanker and just blow it point blank with its main battery guns. It's crazy. It's an interesting ship. I don't think it really did anything. If I'm reading it correctly, so it actually ran into a collision with a U.S. freighter and disappeared. I guess must have sunk. And yeah, I guess we don't actually know what happened to it, but yeah, it's just a strange design. Like, it's a neat idea of like throwing big guns on a ship that could go underwater, but it's still just interesting to say the least, because you're putting a lot of stress on a pretty like relatively small platform, and there's probably a reason why you only see one of them. Like, wasn't a huge thing, or wasn't like super successful. It was just this is one of those one-off designs where you think of it, you're able to create one prototype or whatever it was, or just like one version of it, and that's about it. Like, you see those with planes a lot more, but it's like I said in the last episode, warships are a lot bigger, so you don't exactly have as much room to mess around with these things, because they are extremely large and extremely time intensive and resource intensive compared to your like prototype plane or tank. Like, those are significantly easier to construct and design than a warship. But I think that's part of the reason why I really like looking up these obscure and one-off types of ships, is that there's just like, you just have to wonder why militaries think that it's worth it to try and design something like this, because it's such it's a lot, like, in the grand scheme of things, for like how major nations develop or distribute their resources to production. It's probably not a ton, not even usually that much, especially for like something like the size of a submarine, but it's still interesting to see that they even take the time to build something like the Surcouf or retrofit the Issei class. Like, it's you want to sometimes be a fly on the wall for like conversations like that. It's like, yeah, I'm looking at this. It's a submarine with 8-inch guns and an airplane hangar on it. I think we should fund this. Sounds like a great idea. I don't know. That's just me. I think that's probably just going to do it for this one. This is going to be a probably not my most high energy intense episode in the world, but I just wanted to get something out, just talk about this a little bit, have some fun. I'm in a bit of a Warships mood anyway, because I just recorded my next all the gameplay for my next Warship Wednesdays episode that I will be editing and getting out next Wednesday. I'm also editing a short on the Erebus class, which I actually talked about my last Warship Wednesday's episode. So that's gonna I'll see if I can get it done. Probably not get it done tonight. I'll get it done tomorrow. But yeah, that's gonna be going up sometime soon on my YouTube page. Other than that, though, next episode will be the divisional recap for the NFL. Should be hopefully a fun set of games this weekend. I'm looking forward to it. And after that, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I've got plenty of ideas. Not quite sure what I'm going to do, but I'll figure it out. For now, though, I think that will do it for this one. So thank you very much for listening.